Pops, did you pick up on this jive, man?
What?
Did you pick up on this jive, this crazy music here, man? Did you dig the rebop?
What?
The rebop, Dad, the rebop. He's a square, man. Don't you get this at all? Boy, you take the brew on the side on the time, and you take this bottle right to be able to up at the bow. And if you want to, you take a drink, and all the damn little bop, little bee, little bop, little bop, little bop, 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 bop,
Their name has something of defeat in it. They pride themselves in their non-conformity, but their very revolt serves to emphasize the norms against which they proclaim their rejection.
Anyway, I wrote the book because we're all gonna die. In the loneliness of my life, my father dead, my brother dead, my mother far away, my sister and my wife far away. Nothing here but my own tragic hands.
I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for
came
the
at dawn
ancient
to a
heavenly
warm, misty
connection.
place, barking dogs and the sound of running water. Thomas and Charlie, I said. What? That's the name of this town. Sea level. Flying
Yes,
straight up
hard times in Newquay, it seems, for the few remaining Beatniks still holding out in this Cornish stronghold against a very determined urban district council which has taken some quite unusual steps to drive out its long-haired visitors. Why is your council giving these Beatniks such a hard time?
Well, the trouble started last summer when the first invasion of these types came along. Perhaps one didn't so much object to their eccentricities of dress or even long hair. But when it came to just forgetting to wash and becoming gradually dirtier and dirtier, eventually becoming filthy and finally stinking, we felt it was more than we could stand.
Eric, one of the complaints apparently the council make against you Beatniks is that you don't wash, that you're rather dirty. Is this a valid complaint?
No, I don't think so.
It isn't?
No.
How about yourself? Do you wash very much yourself?
Fairly frequently, yes.
Well, like how often?
About once every 2 days at least.
Do you?
Mm.
Cool, Daddy-o.
Hey, Daddy-o. Crazy, Dad. Pop me, Dad.
I popped you, Dad. You're listening to Subculture UK's podcast, and today we're talking about the thorny and kind of troublesome, in some way, subject of Beatniks. I'm Jim Soul, as you know.
And I'm Danny Gray.
I'm Jim Soul.
And I'm Danny Gray.
There you go.
Am I?
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm relevant like an elephant, Daddy-o.
Existentially. So we're going to talk about the Beatniks today, and we're going to talk a little bit about the scene. Now, it's important. We've done a lot of research, and obviously we know a fair bit ourselves about some of these things, but this has been a real tester, hasn't it?
Certainly has, yeah, for our second show, you know. Yeah, we call ourselves Subculture UK, and trying to find, you know, stuff relevant to Beatniks and the Beat Generation, you know, relevant to the UK was a bit difficult, wasn't it, Jim?
It's a very... The important thing to remember is a very American-driven kind of culture, but it was taken on, obviously, by the Brits here, and we had our own spin on it, and we did our own things that were maybe a bit different.
Probably later as well, wasn't it?
Yeah,
but, I mean, the term beatnik was kind of a media term, wasn't it? And it was generally used as a derogatory term against sort of layabouts and anybody that was in a double queue and things like that.
Exactly, and funny enough, in the same way that maybe, I mean, for different reasons, but you would have terms like chav and stuff like that. It was almost a beatnik. The name was just an invented derogatory term.
Well, the term beatnik was first used in 1957 by the San Francisco Chronicle, just months prior to the Russian space Sputnik was launched.
Yeah,
Sputnik 1. Did it sound like I was reading that, Jim?
No,
not
what are you talking about? It's like you just from the back of your mind.
Yeah, of course, I've known that for years.
But the reason why that they chose to call it that was it wasn't a positive thing. It was to try and align the movement, the beat movement, to the perceived left-wing kind of culture, and so to give it a kind of Russian or a Soviet or communist connotation by calling it Beatnik rather than, you know, taken from the Sputnik thing. And it's quite interesting that instantly you have this in this country, certainly both sides of the political spectrum in terms of the newspapers kind of jump on it with almost equal ferocity in some ways.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, well, as you say, in America, the thing about the communists.
Yeah. Well, the McCarthy.
But it was more about dictatorship, I think, that they were against, not communism.
Well, also you've got to remember that 1945 was still only a breath before, wasn't it? So the war was still fresh in the mind. And if you look at the Soviet movement throughout the 50s and Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia and that throughout the 50s, it was a very real concern. But for people generally, and it was painted a certain way, obviously, in the media. But the other part about it was the McCarthy witch hunt trials, going through Hollywood and all that. That was in the 50s.
It was.
So this is all very, very relevant. When we're talking about Beatnik, it basically comes from the idea of the Beat generation, okay, and there's obviously big names and big turning points in that, but
three main characters.
We'll start with the three horsemen of the apocalypse, if you like. So there's obviously Jack Kerouac, who wrote On the Road, which I don't think he was happy with the term, but everybody else seemed to crown him as the originator of this.
Yeah, they said he didn't like the term Beatnik. As I said, it was a media. It was a media term. Beat generation. I think Kerouac invented.
And you've got to remember that On the Road was written originally in sort of 48. It was quite old, and or the original transcripts, and then a bit later, I think the first version of it was published in about 52. It's quite early,
right?
But it was very much surrounded around this idea of modern jazz, abstract expressionist art, this kind of idea of existentialism, which we'll come to, and this moving out of the social constraints, which ties in, funny enough, with what we were talking about last time with the Teddy Boys and the reaction of the teenager. It's kind of the same thing, but this is much more from an intellectual point of view, Dan.
Yeah, well, it's a rejection of social conformity, isn't it, as well? I mean, it's ironically, once again, a middle class sort of movement, as we're finding the more we look into these things, doesn't it? I mean, didn't art have a lot to do with it as well? I mean, there was, when I don't know if that's more of an English sort of thing, but when you see the old films like the Hancock film and stuff like that, it was art, it was poetry, it was.
Yeah, well, the whole thing is, that's what I'm saying, it's intertwined. Maybe. It really is. It's an art movement. So if you look at, in terms of poetry would have been something that would have been, read. And I'm not saying exclusively during the Beatnik era was, the idea of performance poetry invented, but it certainly became popular. So the idea that you could be a poet and your performance of your poetry would be as important as the poem itself, it seems to be very much a Beat generation thing. So you have, the big three, as we said. You've got Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and probably, I suppose, Burroughs would be the big one.
So where was this sort of happening? This was around sort of Greenwich Village, wasn't it? New York?
Greenwich Village,
and
New
also
York.
San Francisco, the San Francisco Renaissance movement as well.
Yeah.
But was it happening around the world, Jim?
Yeah, it was, because this is the other thing, is if you look at Sartre, as in Jean-Paul Sartre, and this kind of movement of existentialism, that starts to
That was
really
in Hamburg, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, but it also gains massive weight in Paris.
Yeah, sure.
And the 50s musicians, or the late 40s and 50s bebop musicians, really found a spiritual home at Paris, because they were free of some of America's racial prejudice as well at that time. So in the 50s, the early 50s certainly, you started to get the big modern jazz performers, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Milt Jackson, those kind of people, Bud Powell. They would be welcomed with open arms.
Yeah.
Into Paris society, and that's why, again, we have this tie-in with the Beatnik thing. We have this tie-in with French culture as well.
Yeah. Well, also, you had the X's, didn't you, in Hamburg and in Europe? And there's very, very much similarities to Beatniks. With sort of dress and all that.
Absolutely.
They were kind of the successors to the swing kids of the 1930s. Based, obviously, on the existentialist views of Jean-Paul Sartre and Nietzsche, and belief that existence precedes essence. But we don't want to go on about that, do we? We don't want to pretend we know too much about that, Jim.
Well, no, but but it is crucial for understanding what this was and how it came about, in as much as it was the first sort of generation, if you like, that was saying we're kind of free of some of the social constraints that our parents had, and like the rock and roll thing and the Teddy Boys over here in Britain, and certainly the Beatniks in Britain were the same. They wanted this new expressionism, this new freedom, and they just went about it in a different way. It was just more, reading books, and I've got to say it, slightly pretentious at times.
Junk is no good, baby. There's no good, baby junk. No good baby is junk. Good baby, junk is no. Baby junk is no good. Junk baby is no good. Is no good, junk baby. No good junk baby is. Good junk baby is no. Baby is no good, junk.
So that's Brian Gysin, which is
a load of old flannel.
I think the BBC radio audience that listened to it thought so. I think this was first aired in the late 50s, maybe early 60s. But I do know that it's got still now one of the lowest audiences of any BBC production.
There, Jim, isn't
yeah.
there?
Well, the idea behind that Brian Gysin thing, and I suppose it's got a cleverness in its own way, was it's what they call a permutation poem, where you get a line. The line is "Junk is no good, baby." And then you say each permutation after that. Now, is that poetry, or is that just basically taking 4 or 5 words and saying them in different orders? You decide.
Well, it's art, baby, isn't it?
That's it. And so we get this idea of.
You were telling me about Burroughs as well. He did a similar thing, didn't he?
With the cut-ups, yeah. I mean, William Burroughs. I mean, and again, we'll put this into context as well. But I think drugs certainly helped in this culture, in as much as there's a different kind of drug use which points towards a future thing as well in the 60s and the late 60s. But with Burroughs, he did these famous cut-ups where they would basically do a load of heroin.
Right.
Cut up a load of words from...
Obviously, we did a load of heroin before this show, didn't we?
Well, listen, we wouldn't be this cool otherwise.
Daddy-o.
Yeah. Drugs are bad.
Fuck me, Dad.
Stay in school, kids.
Fuck you, Dad.
No, so Burroughs would take a lot of he'd take maybe a book or newspaper, and he would just cut random words and then put them together in a random way, and then whatever sentence that formed, that was immediate. It was of the moment. It wasn't contrived. It wasn't him trying to enforce his will, man, on you. It was more, yeah. But Burroughs is an interesting character, because even by this time, when the Naked Lunch comes out, which is obviously a seminal book, which people have to remember as well, you had to buy under the counter in a lot of places. Oh yeah, it was real counter.
Well, I've read Junk, or Junkie, sorry.
Yeah,
I read Junk, and that was a read and a half.
Yeah, exactly.
It was good. I read it on holiday, I think. It was probably not the best place to read it, but it passed the time, should we say.
Sitting on the beach,
yeah,
reading like heroin-addled scrawlings of a madman. But
homosexual antics and all this sort of stuff.
Exactly. But that's, I mean, if you listen at the clip at the top of the show as well, we had a bit of an extract from Naked Lunch. There was also an extract from Howl by Ginsberg, and that's a real powerful poem. I mean, certainly for its day in, 56? Something
56,
like that?
yeah.
It's a real powerful, it talks about, sexual liberation and drug use and things, and this would have been horrifying for the mainstream. And I suppose that's what shocked people.
These are the Beatniks, the defiant young, coming from every walk of life, wrought with suppressed emotions, and mocking the everyday course of modern society, intent on striking back as they wage a battle for their right to be heard.
Getting pushed around so long, you start pushing back harder and harder. You get to like it. You feel like somebody.
So you can see that's the media perception of this is demonic and scary. And
yeah, well, as I say, especially over here, well, they just didn't like anything different, did they? It's the same with the Teddy Boy thing that we talked about in the last show. It was after the war, basically, was it? And they wanted the people coming out of the army and all that stuff. They just wanted to settle down and calm down, and they had all this sort of thing going on, didn't they? I mean, that's more for here than it is over there, because this was kind of a 50s thing, wasn't it?
Well, you made a great point to me during the week when we were talking, and it was about how the Teddy Boy revolution, if you like, was a revolution for nothing. There was no
There was no
cause.
reason behind it. No, it wasn't. It was just a rebellious, like, well, coining the phrase "rebel without a cause," wasn't it?
There you go. Whereas the beat thing is much more about an intellectual moving forward of the consciousness and of the species. I don't want to sound pretentious myself, but that's the idea. They thought
it's a rebellion even against conformity and society, isn't it? You know.
Yeah. I mean, another idea. Because
what I was going to say is there sort of aspects of sort of atheism and Marxism and all that sort of stuff in there, isn't there?
Very, very much. I mean, and that's why.
Which is why the American government didn't like it too much.
Absolutely, but even in this country as well, to be,
as you say, in that McCarthy era, it was
to
very
be
paranoid
atheist,
time, wasn't it?
To be atheist in the 50s would have been quite a brave thing to do in public as well. There's a great headline and spread. It's 1960 in the People, and it was brought about by a Lord Montague, who was running the Bolio Jazz Festival, which I think was about the 5th year into its run. And there was a load of beatniks turn up and a load of trad jazz people as well.
Jazzers.
And it's interesting because they talk about that there was people climbed up on the pylons and brought fences down, and there was some scuffles and this, that, and the other. And the headline the next day on the People, and it's quite easy to research, is called "Blame These 4 Men for the Beatnik Horror."
Right.
And the 4 men.
This is English, isn't it?
This is in the People, 7th of August, 1960.
That must be true then.
It must be true. And it was all on the back of Lord Montague's Jazz Festival being a little bit ruined by, some scuffles and problems. But it's interesting that the paper used it to expand not on some civil unrest at a jazz festival. They actually pinpointed 4 people and said, blame these 4 men for the Beatnik horror, as if it was a horror. We're all meant to think it's a horror anyway. And he talks about, he cites Kerouac, Corso, Ginsberg and William Burroughs. And it's interesting, if you read the headline, it's a 2-page spread, and he's actually given them all a little handle. And so Crusoe is the crackpot, or the crack poet, not crack as in the cocaine went, just as in the crazy. The Kerouac is called the hobo's prophet.
Oh, right.
Which is brilliant. William Burroughs is simply the ex-drug addict.
Right.
I don't know how much X there was at that point, to be honest.
He wrote about it quite a bit, didn't he?
Yeah. And Ginsberg is labelled in the paper as the hate merchant. Now, there's pictures of the 4, and these slogans are put next to their pictures so that you're left in no doubt. And that's the point. The thing, I think they really feared this new intellectualism, this new freedom, and this new right to do things. Yes, we can argue that some of it was pretentious and it went too far, but the backlash, certainly in the UK, more so I think even than America, which was maybe a bit more paranoid even in those days, was unprecedented. And they talk a lot about them not being clean.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, isn't there? It's funny,
There's a great clip I think you've got lined up for us here, Dan, about the last beatnik sort of group in Newquay in 1960.
That was in the
Oh, was it? Oh, right. That was
in
in the yeah, of course.
In the intro. Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Sorry, my mistake. But what's great about that thing is that you hear, and it's
how many were there exactly?
40.
You brought me that clip, didn't you?
40.
And it's the town are just so against anything different, aren't they? That's all it is. It's just they're all happy in their little suburban village, and listening to their Frank Sinatra records, all this sort of stuff.
Well, just to remind you, I mean, in the clip, what you get is the Newquay Council in Cornwall has taken out injunctions to move these people on, these beatniks on. And once you actually get more into it, and it's available online, you can find it on YouTube and places like that, it's Alan Wicker in 1960, and he's, very straight and very sort of, erudite and all the rest of it, but he's talking to the leader of the council in Newquay, and the guy seems insistent about the main reason they don't want them there is because they smell and they don't wash.
I mean, there's not that much stuff about beatniks in the UK, is there? Online, at least. There's stuff we obviously found a few things, and we knew a few things.
Yeah. There's a lot of the American thing is important, and the reason why
that's the roots, isn't it? That's the fundamental roots of the thing.
And I think the reason why we were very insistent about doing this show as well is that the Beatnik thing. It's a piece of jigsaw, absolutely. But what it also is it's so many signposts as to what comes next.
Yeah, absolutely.
But got a great clip coming up of a Beatnik wedding. Now you've got a bit of background on this one as well.
Well, no, I was looking through things, and we obviously like to pick up some Pathy News clips and stuff like that. And when I watched this, it was like just trying to find something from Pathy News about the Beatniks, and all I could find was, like I say, negative stuff. And there was this clip about a Beatnik wedding in Soho. But if you look at the actual clip, it just looks like a mod and a rocker, really.
When you're saying that one of them's got a...
Well, one's got a Lambretta and the other one's a scooter, Lambretta scooter, and the other one's got like a Triumph or something. But they're classed as Beatniks.
Because it's just a derogatory term.
It was all over Soho, man. And after the first shot, the cats quite liked the idea. 4 of this gang were getting married. Yeah, really, genuine matrimonial stuff. Can you beat it, Daddy-O? They went to Louis Young's, where you can get all dolled up just the way they used to in the dark ages before coffee bars were thought of. Talk about a white wedding. The Beatniks were cool as you like, going through all this caper. Gowns, veils, top hats, the lot. It's amazing what love will do, even to up-to-date gals and fellas.
So you can hear. I mean, basically, it's a parody, isn't it?
It's just a load of flannel again, isn't it?
These guys are really groovy.
Yes, and it's all talking like that. One more time. Congratulations for England and the British Empire, and blah blah blah.
But what I find cool about that clip what I find cool about that clip though is the fact that it just shows the complete ineptitude of the media to understand what was going on. I mean, very much. We were talking just before we came on air about how the term Beatnik was never coined by the Beat generation. No. Certainly, the people that seem to be instrumental in it. And it reminded me of the grunge thing, the Seattle rock thing in the 90s. In as much as they never described themselves as grunge, Britpop, hated the term, didn't want anything to do with it. It was a media invention, and it's funny because this is one of the first times that you see...
Well, they feel the need to categorise things, don't they? That's the trouble. But that's half of the creation of of the problem, isn't it? Because they categorise stuff and put it into a pigeonhole, put it into a box, and then it causes all sorts of problems.
And like
a rebellion.
And I think we touched on it earlier on, a lot of the certainly in the UK, a lot of the Beatnik stuff as well was amongst the middle class. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was working class Beatniks as well, obviously, but it seems it was more about the university class, I suppose I'd call it. Yeah. And so I think there was also
art school as well.
Loads of that. And there's on the back of that People excerpt, and we'll come back to this in a second as well. But on the back of that as well, there's a great photo of in Liverpool, and it's basically a flat share for the art students. And in the picture is a very young Stu Sutcliffe and John Lennon. John Lennon's
original bass player for the Beatles.
That's it. And it's also got Alan Williams, which was their first manager. Little sort of high-pitched Welsh voice.
That's right. He ran a club, didn't he? Does he run the Cellar or something like that, Alan Williams?
Yes, he had a coffee bar or a club or something like that. And he was the first one to take them to Hamburg.
Right, yeah.
Where they run into...
To the Reeperbahn.
To the Reeperbahn.
It's a Kaiserkiller.
Exactly,
yeah. That is good.
Max Schau.
Oh, Max Schau.
Where they run into...
Well, that's where the Beatles got their haircuts from, wasn't it? When they met up with Klaus Voormann, who himself was an existentialist.
His sister Astrid as well, obviously.
It's not his sister, was it? It was his girlfriend, and Stuart Sutcliffe
stole
him off her.
Oh, that's right.
Stole her off him. Stole him off her? What?
Something got stolen.
Something got stolen, and I'm not sure if they ever gave it back.
But it's interesting, because if you look at that, the X's, you mentioned it earlier on, touched it, it's interesting, because the existentialism, I think I've got a handle roughly on what existentialism is.
Well, I mean, it's like an opposition to essentialism, isn't it? The Plato theory of, in a nutshell, without going into it too much, it's like, we're created and we have a purpose.
Yep.
Our purpose is
predetermined.
Yeah, but the existentialism view of things, Sartre's view was that we define our purpose as we live our lives.
By being here, yeah.
Absolutely.
And doing what we're doing. But
there's a lot more extreme sort of examples of that. But,
absolutely.
Mate, I'm just explaining to you, you know what I mean? I've got to get you to understand, Jim. You know what I'm saying, son?
Well, like I say, I'm
on a higher plane than you, Jim. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm way up there, bruv.
Of course you are, mate.
Of course you are, mate.
But the thing is, we're not pretending to understand everything about existentialism. And it's an important thing, and we'll make these points as we go through. You're more than welcome to contribute to the debate.
In me? Thanks,
not
Jim.
so much you,
Thanks
Dan,
so
but
much.
I'm saying the great British public and the listening public throughout the world.
Definitely.
In as much as we want to know, if you were there, or if you know people, or if your father, or your grandfather now, possibly uncles, whatever, if they were beatniks, then let us know. The main thing is, I think, it's a forum.
Yeah.
We sort of like to see ourselves as kind of almost like cultural commentators rather than experts. So the email address, Dan, give me that.
The email address is subcultureuk@btinternet.com.
Okay, and obviously you can get us through Subculture UK's podcast on Podbean.
Well, we also have a Twitter account which is @subcultureuk_1, and you can get us on Facebook, which is Subculture UK Podcast, @Subculture UK Podcast.
So use all this media, because the idea is we might revisit some of these subjects.
We've had some letters as well, and we'll read them out later, won't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So existentialism, the idea of this kind of living in the moment and you defining your future and your past, your reality by what you do, was taken on obviously in Hamburg. There's quite a strong exi. I mean, it's an American thing as well, and obviously it's Sartre and stuff in Paris. The exes.
The Beatles were quite into it, weren't they? Because they were hanging around with the exes out in Hamburg.
Yeah,
and with Astrid Kircher and Klaus Forman, and Klaus Forman was one of these sort of chaps, and that's where the Beatles. That's what I was saying. The Beatle haircut come from that, didn't it?
Absolutely, and it's funny because if you look at that first Beatle haircut now, it basically is a beatnik haircut.
Yeah. Which is what you would define as.
It's the bowl haircut, but without having the small goatee.
Apparently, Stuart Sutcliffe, because he was going out with Astrid Kircher, he was the first one to have the haircut. I think Lennon was absolutely opposed to it 100%.
Well,
he was still had he had still had the leathers and the Teddy Boy quiff, and that's what Lennon wanted to be, wasn't it? The leather-clad rocker.
Yeah.
And I think it was McCartney, and it was obviously Epstein that changed all that, wasn't it? But I got a clip from Tony Hancock, the rebel.
Josie's an existentialist. Oh, yes, one of old Jean-Paul Sartre's, mob, eh? I understand. She's very keen on it. I'm afraid it's beyond me. It's a philosophy I can't follow.
It's quite simple. We believe that life is immediate. The future does not exist. Why kill time when you can kill yourself?
Yes, it's a point of view. I suppose so.
All my friends are existentialists.
Yeah, well, it's company for, isn't it?
That's brilliant.
I love that clip. I love Hancock. And of course that was Nanette Newman in there as well.
Was it Nanette Newman? Was she the one who did
Say that again?
No, 19. Was it Nanette Newman?
No.
It's not kind to mock the afflicted.
Sorry, Jim.
Was it herself who was in... Was it the coffee adverts and stuff when we were kids?
Yeah,
Nanette
something,
Newman?
wasn't it?
I've got a memory of that. Or Fairy Liquid or something. So just getting back to the existentialist thing and the idea of the young Beatles, 1960, a couple of them pictured in this art school thing.
And this was in Liverpool, wasn't it?
This is in Liverpool, very much with the beards, with Alan Williams, who's their boss, who's then in the photo as well, and it's described as the squalor of the squat, and it actually looks like quite a nice flat, really, for student flats. He takes them to Hamburg, so you can see that they're even being influenced in the UK by this sort of beat thing. They go to Hamburg, after a couple of meets, they Klaus Forman, Astrid Kirsch, they give them this idea of existentialism, and it's all adding flames to the fire,
Lennon and Stuart Sutcliffe were art students as well, weren't they?
Absolutely.
I mean, they were influenced by that sort of thing. I mean, even Lennon's, they put the name Beat in their name, of course.
Yeah, it's not an accident, and it's spelt the way it is.
Exactly, it was an ode to, And I know later on that I think it was Allen Ginsberg that he was on McCartney's Christmas list.
Dylan,
obviously the Rolling Stones and people like that. You know.
Well, I mean, we'll speak a little bit in other shows, but it's interesting that when we go back to the clip we were talking about before, when we were talking about the Berlioz Jazz Festival, they talk about, in 1960, they talk about the fights or the arguments being between the trad jazz fans and the modernists.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's interesting how they coin them as modernists, and this...
What year was this?
Pardon me?
What year was this?
1960.
Right, okay.
And it's interesting that this is a term that the early mods...
I was going to say that's the term for the early mods, which
there you go.
modernists.
And it's that sort of jazz influence as well, modern jazz influence as well, that was evident in the early mod stuff. Talking about art, we'll just touch on that very quickly, because obviously you've got to see it against the backdrop of the abstract expressionist artists, and so we're talking about Jackson Pollock's, Robert De Niro Sr., ironically, Mark Rothko, and if you look at what their work is, it's this kind of, daubs of paint or action paintings, as they've described as, and it was taking the idea of it's the moment, not what you end up with. Right. It wasn't particularly interesting to them, and interestingly, I suppose, Jackson Pollock dies in a drink driving accident. Mark Rothko takes his own life, sadly. It was very much this kind of almost rock and roll version of art. Sure. As well. So this is all building up, from the 40s through into the 50s and getting this kind of movement together.
What about Andy Warhol and that sort of movement as well, the pop art thing?
Well, Andy Warhol started 100% as a abstract expressionist.
Sure. But he had a sort of beatnik look about him, didn't he?
Absolutely, but then what happened was, if you look at Litchfield and stuff like that, he comes through and does these pop paintings as a rejection of abstract expressionism, because he thought it was too pretentious. So pop art for him was, let's bring it back to the masses, and that's why it is these cartoons and that. And that's where Warhol gets his ideas, but maybe a little later. Early Warhol work is very much along the same lines as the kind of, not what Jackson Pollock does, but certainly the intention of it's in the moment and all that.
So it's poetry, it's art, it's literature,
but it's dynamic. It's what you do at that moment.
Photography, that sort of thing. Does it come into it at all?
Yeah, absolutely. But then you get Warhol, certainly as it goes through the factory in the 60s stuff. What he starts to talk about is that the art itself is the nature of consumerism and the nature of selling paintings and stuff. And so he talks about this idea of, in the future, everyone will be entitled to 15 minutes of fame. What he means is fame will be a commodity, and he was absolutely right. But that was a bit further on. But he's certainly inspired by, and ground zero to a lot of this kind of thinking is the Beat generation and then the Beatniks.
Right.
And certainly in the UK, it was taken up by great poets like Pete Brown.
Yeah.
Who we'll thank. We've got to thank you to doing the letters as well.
We have. That's a thank you to Nettie Baker, who sent this information in to us. So thank you, Nettie. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And for those who don't know as well, I don't think it's gratuitous for us to say, but Nettie Baker is the daughter of one Ginger Baker.
Indeed, yeah.
And the early beats and the early poets and stuff like that, they would work together with musicians. That was the difference. It was a live thing. So when you get someone like Pete Baker, who's got a great back catalogue, and he was instrumental in what did I say?
Pete Baker.
Pete Baker.
Done it again, Jim.
The lesser known Pete Baker. Pete Brown. He was instrumental in collaborating with not only Ginger Baker, of course, but
has he been known as the fourth member of Cream as well?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's well known that he kind of co-wrote lyrics and stuff and had input into I Feel Free, White Room,
right,
Sunshiny Love.
Okay.
I mean, arguably three of their biggest hits, and others as well. But he still continues to be, a voice, and has been a performance poet and obviously a traditional singer as well. But was very much part of that English version of beat poetry and performance poetry.
He's actually got a website as well, Jim, and that's www.petebrown.co.uk.
Interesting. He's an interesting guy. You should have a look at some of his stuff.
But you can also find more information about him and Ginger Baker as well at gingerbaker.com.
And for those that haven't seen enough or read enough about Mr. Baker, you should do. He's a defining character in so many ways in British culture and rock music and jazz culture as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, he was playing with the Graham Bond organisation.
Yeah.
Alexis Corner, I think, as well, possibly.
Definitely, yeah. The early blues
Apologise
stuff.
if I've got that wrong.
No, I think you're right. But
well, he was a jazz drummer.
But I think he always considered himself to be.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a great quote I remember seeing, and it was him and it was Jack Bruce. I think.
Did you see the film Beware of Mr. Baker?
Oh, that's a great film. But he and it's Jack Bruce, and he was talking about Clapton, and the interviewer says something like, "Did Eric know that he was in a jazz band?" Because he was describing it as a jazz band, and he said it always was a jazz band. We just never told Eric. So that was the idea: is that the Cream approached rock music with a jazz ethos of improvisation and this, that, and the other,
right,
which they were famous for, and that's because Ginger Baker was such an adept jazz drummer and understood the form and understood how to improvise.
He was more than a drummer, wasn't he?
He was great musician. Yeah. So the whole beatnik culture, as we say, it's very much points towards things, but it's also got references in mainstream culture, almost humorously. Here's Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Now, back to the Bullwinkle Show.
Our subject for today is how to be a beatnik. Some people think the beatnik is merely a bum with sunglasses, but he is more than that. Though not much. The first step in becoming a beatnik is to grow a beard. This can be a long process, particularly if you're a girl. Clothing-wise, we should remember this important rule. The well-dressed beatnik is seldom neatnik. Beatniks hang out in unemployment lines, health food stores, but most of all in coffee houses.
So I think that encapsulates it. Actually, funny enough, one of the other things that I always thought, but I didn't know enough about the culture, was I always thought that a beatnik in popular culture, one that I kind of thought, well, he looks like a beatnik, what I'd understand to be a beatnik. Because the bongo playing thing is important as well.
Very
talk about that. Was Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. Now, if you look, he's everything's like a man and all this thing, but he's wearing the traditional sort of beatnik sandals.
Well, there is a look, isn't there? You know, there's a
and the bowl haircut.
We've got to mention the stereotypical.
Well, what I was just going to say, Dan, just for a second, is it? What I didn't realise was that Mattel brought out a doll in 1963 called the Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo. And it was a beatnik doll.
Yeah, I've seen the advert, like a little clip.
Brilliant. And it's got the bright coloured smock on and the rest of it. And if you pressed the button, it had 11 phrases, and one of them was Cool Daddy-O.
Daddy-O, yeah, Crazy Man, and all that sort of
stuff. And it was typically out of its time, in as much as it was 63 in America when this doll came out. And Scooby-Doo comes out in 69.
Yeah.
And yet they're still referencing a beatnik rather than a hippie. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Because maybe the age of the people writing the cartoons rather than the young people in the counterculture.
Well, was it possibly that's the cartoon on TV, isn't it? Was it like a cartoon in a magazine first?
No, not I'm aware of. I think it was
actually created in 69.
Hanna-Barbera and I think late 60s. And I think this is what I'm saying. If you look at exactly, but if you look at Scooby-Doo himself, he's kind of a beatnik kind of, and they show him as being slightly.
It's a cartoon dog. What are you on about?
Well, but they show him as being kind of cowardly and a bit
much.
and a bit. And the Scooby Snacks thing is obviously a bit of a cultural reference as well to drug influence. But it's interesting as well. We just to mention the drug thing, we will do, because I think this is one of the first. Heroin is obviously very, very big in the jazz culture in the 40s and going back to the 30s. It's well documented. Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and those kind of... Well, not Dizzy, actually. I'm doing him a disservice because he never did. But Charlie
Frank
Parker
Sinatra was in a film, wasn't he, about a famous drummer. I can't remember the name of the drummer, but The Man with the Golden Arm. Great film. And it was
but they all were. I mean, Charlie Parker was a heroin addict, and the people of his generation in the 40s, they thought he was that good because he took drugs. Now, that's a prevailing myth. But that kind of drug use, and in the beats, it's much more things like what? What sort of drugs are they using?
Oh, mescaline. Well, cannabis. Lots of cannabis. You know, that's an obvious one. I mean, that went through the hippies and all sorts of opiates, that type of thing. You know, what are you asking me for?
Because I think you know. But I think so the idea is that the beat. And we'll sort of wrap
what
this
about
up a little bit.
religions, Jim, as well? Buddhism and Eastern religions,
Yeah,
stuff like that.
certainly.
That was quite, with Kerouac.
It's massive. And certainly Ginsberg, I mean, he goes and becomes a Buddhist and all the rest of it. But but if you... The Eastern religion thing in the UK, if you read about... There's these these yogis that are coming over in the early 60s to speak to the British... Way before 68 and the Beatles are going over to... and they've been found out to be fraudulent. In fact, one, I can't remember his name so I won't slander him, but one of these yogis as early as about 1959, 60, he's doing these big existential meditation courses and all the rest of it, and he's giving out these drinks and they find that it's all opiated. Right. So basically he's getting everybody high and then telling them what they want to hear, and then they go off and preach the gospel. But
it's like the mass ecstasy of the rave scene.
There you go. That's it.
Get them to like anything.
There you go. Now the thing is about this, the reason why the Beatniks is such a huge subject, and obviously once you're touching on art and intellectualism and all these other things, you're not going to be able to do that in an hour show, but we'll do our best to kind of wrap up what we've done. We'll probably come back and touch on some of these areas again.
Definitely.
And there are...
Well, this is prevalent to the... this is, you know, the hippie movement and all that. You know, this kind of leads to the hippie movement, doesn't it? We're going to do a show on that.
And mod.
Yeah,
it's certainly
the jazz connection.
The jazz connection, and also the kind of idea of existentialism. This immediate.
I mean, early mod, the flamenco, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So we're gonna wrap up Beatniks for now, but we've got a couple of letters, haven't we? A couple of emails and some correspondence that we'd like to. It's your letters.
Well, thanks again to Nettie Baker, obviously, who sent us in for that information. But we've had a message on, I think it's Podbean, from Exterminator Yanimerum 666. Is
That's
that right?
easy for you to say.
Yeah, well, you know. And these letters says, just wanted to say, as a modern teenager, it's really interesting to hear about teen cultures of the past. You guys are doing a great job, and I hope you do more episodes. I'm looking forward to hearing more from you, which is very nice, so thanks for that.
Thank you very much.
Another one from Mike from Shearwater says, nice one messing up the reviews on the last show. Who are the rising stars? LOL.
Right, so for those that haven't yet listened to episode one, slap yourself on the hand and go and listen to it now. But secondly, we also do a review on some music, and this is kindly brought to us as well by Detour Records.
Yeah, thanks Dizzy and all at Detour.
But we will be reviewing in the future as well other releases from other companies as well. So
absolutely.
But we've got a couple of other releases to speak about today.
Before we do, we've got one little letter. Sorry, Jim.
All right.
So it's more of a shout out to a company called In Music We Trust, who describe themselves as a music-based clothing brand who donate 50% of their profits to the Mind charity supporting sufferers with depression. So that's a really good cause.
Yeah, great cause.
And they contacted us through Twitter, and that's at IMWT Clothing, and that's a very worthy cause.
Perfect. So once again, if there are several ways to join the debate with us here at Subculture UK, and we'll probably read out a couple of those contacts at the end. But we're going to do our review now from the kind people at Detour Records. They've sent us a couple of things to listen to this week, and we've enjoyed very much listening to...
Very much so. We've had it's a couple of albums, actually, and the first album is from a band called The Chosen. Recently got back together, I believe, on the Paisley Archive label. And this album is about 20 tracks. It's a mixture, isn't it, of old, I think, previously unreleased.
Yeah, rarities,
all that sort of stuff. Jim and I have had a good old listen. It's great, really like it, you know. And if you're a Chosen fan, obviously, this is a real gem. This is something, you know.
And I don't think we're being disingenuous to say this as well, but I know that one of the reasons that the Chosen were doing very well in the 90s, and then they unfortunately lost their drummer, and I think that kind of sad demise at that time knocked them back a little bit. So it's lovely to see them back with a release and hearing some of those rarities from that. So this is The Chosen, and we're just going to give you a quick montage of a couple of tracks. Three tracks, and it's available on, obviously, Paisley Archive.
Paisley Archive, even.
Detour Records.
And the album's called As If by Magic, and this is The Chosen.
When you're slipping into sleep, that's a time to unwind. Sinking down into the deep, that's a time of no time. You're slipping into sleep. All the sounds around you seem to have a new meaning. Leave your body behind you with a different feeling. Slipping into sleep. Day is night, the night is day. So please hold the light as I slip away.
Well, that's a Small Faces cover, isn't it?
Yeah, fantastic. I really like. Do you know what? I genuinely enjoyed listening to this. Obviously, you can tell it's a great band. You can tell they're tight. You know, the music is got a foot in the past. It's sensitive to that kind of 60s.
Well, I remember The Chosen being around back in the 90s when Parade, you know, when the band that I was in on Detour Records were around. Yeah, they were a great band. But the first track we heard there was a snippet from Almost There. The second one was Some Kind of Wonderful. And the last track we heard there was Up the Wooden Hills to Bedfordshire.
Which is your Small Faces.
It is. Well, like I say, there's about 20 tracks on that, and this has got to be gold, you know, to any Chosen fan, I'm sure, you know. Brilliant.
Or not. I mean, to be honest with you, it's rarities. No, what I mean is, you don't have to be a Chosen fan. No. There's probably lots of people that enjoy it. I certainly wouldn't normally have chosen maybe a track like on an album like this, but I actually really enjoyed it.
It was, yeah, it was great, very good, yeah.
So what's up next?
Did we give them the release date for that, Jim? I think we did, but we'll say it again if we can find it. That will be released on Friday the 8th of September.
Oh, fantastic. Right, there you go.
Right, the next album that we are playing to you is with 3 tracks from the Sha-La-Las. Love the Sha-La-Las.
Yeah.
Really great. They've also had an album out before this on Detour Records. And a great track, Soul of the Nation, one of my favourite tracks a few years back. So let's play a few of those. The first track is called Got to Find a Better Way.
I got to find me a better way. A better way. Want somebody a better way. Somebody help me find a better way. Somebody, I knew where I was going. I got lost along the way. Now I'm not where I should be. But this ain't working for me. Better way. I got to find me a better way. Want somebody a better way.
there you have the Shalalas.
Love that.
Yeah, they're great. I mean, great bands, I think, they definitely stand a test of time. And I know that that Darren Robinson and the boys have been doing this kind of music for a long time. Not necessarily as the Shalalas, I know as previous bands as well, Darren was involved in, but great soulful voice.
Brilliant.
You know, real kind of mod sensibilities, blue-eyed soul, all that stuff.
But these guys could be on the acid jazz label. I mean, they're in the same sort of vein as bands like New Street Adventure or even Stone Foundation, you know, current bands, and just a real good sort of soul vibe. Great voice as well. Love his vocals.
But that's a great release for Dizzy and the boys and girls at Detour, because it's a good catch to have them on the label. And I liked the offering that we were listening to. The 3 tracks we listened to, the first one was called "Got to Find a Better Way," and then "Leave the Hurtin' Behind," "Move On," and then "Crossfire."
Instrumental. Great.
Instrumental, yeah, it's great. I mean, I think there's some really, really capable playing, and I really like Darren's vocals. Always have done.
Brilliant.
In fact,
I'm real soulful voice.
I'm showing my age here, but I remember going to see one of his old bands years ago called Tamburlaine, probably in the early 90s, and he's always had a presence. I mean, it's a definite buy. Have we got a release date on that?
We have. I think that's the same date. That's Friday the 8th of September.
Fantastic. That's the Shalalas, and it's called "Got to Find a Better Way." Is the CD.
Great. So, what have you been up to, Jim?
Well, I've been planning and doing a podcast, Danny. What about yourself?
Any good? Don't be a smart ass, Jim. It doesn't suit you, mate. It really doesn't suit me. I mean, with your band...
Yeah, there's a lot of music going on. I mean, basically, with my band, the Launchers, we're an 8-piece. We sort of describe ourselves as a ska and reggae influenced band, although a lot of what we do is quite guitar orientated as well. We got our first single coming out under that name, The Launchers, on the 26th of August, and that's called Dirty Mouth.
And it's a great track, Jim. It really is a great track. And you've got a video coming out as well soon.
There's a video that accompanies that as well, which, if I don't mind saying myself, is hilarious.
Is it?
I think it's really funny. You might see some ugly mugs in it, but it's quite good.
I've seen a clip of it, and there's a particularly handsome chap
reading a newspaper at the back.
Reading a newspaper at the back, yeah. So
who would that be?
It's very incestuous business, isn't it, Jim? It's a great. So Jim, what do you think? What we're going to talk about next? I mean, we're wrapping up to the end of the show now, but obviously we're going to do lots more of these shows.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where are we going to go next with that? Do we know? I mean, we've got some ideas.
We've got some great ideas, but again, we really want to keep the lines of communication open. So if you've got some areas out there that you would like us to focus on, or some styles, or even some of the shows that we've actually talked about doing might not necessarily be a subculture in themselves, but we might do a show on graffiti and street art. We might do something on fanzines, was one we were talking about the other day.
Yeah. Or modes of transport. Obviously the mods had their scooters, and Rockabilly's had their Ford Consoles and Zodiacs and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Well, obviously the obvious ones that rave culture, the mod revival. Well, 3 phases of mod, if you like, possibly 4 phases of mod. So we can really milk the mod thing, which I'll be happy about. I'm sure you will too.
And we're also very proud to announce that we'll be having a special
show on the Glory Boy Mod Show. Yeah.
That's right, and that's, I think, on the bank holiday weekend as well, isn't it? August 26th?
That's what we're talking about at the moment. That's with Alan May, of course. Good
so
friend
there will be a special coming up on the 26th of August on the Glory Boy Mod radio show with Alan May, and that'll be us here, myself, Jim Soul and Danny, at Subculture UK. So in conclusion, Dan, what do we think about the Beatniks?
Well, I think it's all relevant, isn't it? And it all leads to further movements and all that sort of stuff. I think there's a bit of a lack of information for us for the. I'm not sure it was as relevant over here.
No,
as it was in the States, shall we say? You talk about San Francisco and Greenwich Village, and it's you know, immediately you would talk about that.
Well, if you talk about some of the big areas of Greenwich Village, like the Café Noir, and a few years later, that's where Hendrix is discovered. So it's a big scene. But I do think in the UK, the Beatnik thing, certainly what it did was it led to the beginnings of lots of other great cultures, hippies, this elements of the existentialism, the kind of, also the getting back to nature thing was quite big in the Beatniks thing. Ironically, Eastern philosophies and atheism as well. There was also, I think...
Well, you mean like pagan religion, stuff like that?
Absolutely.
There's a lot of that in it?
Well, the idea of just breaking with the established kind of Christian norms and things like that, I think that was quite a big thing. And I think as well...
I think pagan is very much sort of the hippie thing as well, isn't it? You know, about the trees.
It's all started in the beats, though, isn't it?
Tree hugging and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, absolutely. That leads us straight through to the hippie culture.
To the point where I'll be happy to admit, before maybe a few years ago, I would have seen Beatniks and hippies as pretty much the same thing, because I didn't understand the difference. And I think that the Beatniks certainly had much more of a visceral, intellectual kind of idea behind them, but they led to what was the hippies, which is great. And also elements of it, but elements of the modern jazz and elephants, yeah, they're relevant. It led to... modernism as well, certainly. Yeah. So the roots of that are there. You could even argue that people like Dylan and the folkies are very influenced by Ginsberg and those kind of poets, and Pete Brown, our very own Pete Brown, and people like that in this country. So the Beatniks for me and the Beat Generation and all that, it seems to me more in the UK as a signpost to the future rather than a massive cultural explosion.
Yeah, we may be wrong. I mean, you can write in and let us know what your thoughts are.
Please do.
Well, all you cats out there, I've been Danny Gray. You haven't?
No, I haven't. I've been Jim Soul. Take care, kids.
Bye.